We were broke, but our love was rich, until a phone call made us millionaires. I thought it would solve all our problems, but instead, it revealed the monster lurking within the man I loved. The worn-out sofa in our tiny apartment used to be my favorite place in the world. It was lumpy, the springs groaned every time you moved, and it had a permanent faint scent of the cheap pizza we'd eat on Friday nights. But it was our place. It was where my husband, Mark, would wrap his arms around me after a long day, where we'd whisper our dreams into the quiet dark. We dreamt of a small house with a garden, of paying off my student loans, of a future where we didn't have to check our bank account before buying brand-name cereal. For 7 years, we were a team. I worked extra shifts as a primary school teacher, and he poured every ounce of his energy into a tech startup that, despite his brilliance, never quite took off. We were broke, but we were happy. We had love, and we were sure that was the only currency that truly mattered. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. I was grading papers, and Mark was staring dejectedly at his laptop. Another rejection email glowing on the screen. The call was from a lawyer. A great-uncle Mark had met twice in his entire life had passed away, leaving him as the sole heir to his estate. We were confused at first, thinking it might be a few $1,000s, maybe enough to fix the rattling sound in our old car. The lawyer corrected us. The inheritance wasn't a few thousand. It was millions. I remember dropping my red pen, watching it roll under the coffee table. Mark just sat there, silent, his face pale. Then he looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. He picked me up and spun me around our cramped living room, laughing a laugh so full of relief and joy it brought tears to my eyes. "We did it, baby," he shouted. "We're free." I remember clinging to him, burying my face in his neck, thinking that all our struggles were finally over. I was so wrong. Our struggles hadn't ended. They had just mutated into something I could never have imagined. The first change was subtle. Mark, who had been meticulously applying for jobs, suddenly stopped. When I asked him about it one evening, he just shrugged. "Why would I? I don't need to work for some jerk in a corner office anymore. I'm my own boss now." I thought it was just the initial shock, the joy of newfound freedom. Then the packages started arriving. A watch that cost more than our car. Italian leather shoes he'd only ever seen in magazines. He started spending his days at high-end cafes, networking. He called it, though he never seemed to have any actual meetings. He'd come home smelling of expensive cologne and single malt whiskey, a scent so foreign in our little apartment that it felt like an intruder. Our conversations, once filled with shared plans and inside jokes, became different. He started critiquing me. It began with my clothes. "You're really going to meet my new associates in that?" he asked one day, gesturing with disgust at the perfectly nice dress I'd bought on sale. "Then it was my job. It's cute that you still play with kids all day," he'd say with a condescending smirk. "But your little teacher's salary wouldn't even cover the tip at the places I'm eating now." Each word was a small, sharp paper cut to my heart. This wasn't the man who used to praise my passion for teaching, the man who would help me cut out construction paper shapes for my students. This was a stranger, a cruel caricature wearing my husband's face. I tried to talk to him, to remind him of the dreams we had together. The house with the garden. "We can buy a mansion now, Sarah," he scoffed. "Why would we want some tiny little cottage in the suburbs? You need to think bigger." But it was never we. It was always I. "I'm buying a new car. I'm looking at investments. I'm meeting important people." I was becoming an accessory, a relic from his old life that he was growing increasingly embarrassed by. The breaking point came last night. I had spent the day preparing his favorite meal, a shepherd's pie I'd learned from his mother. I thought maybe, just maybe, a taste of our old life could bring him back to me. He walked in 2 hours late, not even glancing at the dinner table. He was holding a sleek, black shopping bag from a designer I didn't even recognize. "I need you to clear out your half of the closet," he said, not as a request, but as a command. "My new suits need the space." I just stared at him, the warmth from the oven doing nothing to stop the chill spreading through my chest. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling, "what is happening to us?" We were supposed to build a life together with this money. We were supposed to be a team. He actually laughed. It wasn't the joyful, full-bodied laugh I loved. It was a cold, hollow sound that echoed off our cheap laminate floors. He threw the shopping bag onto our lumpy old sofa, the place where we had built our world. He took a step towards me. His eyes filled with a pity so profound it made me sick. "A team?" he sneered, looking me up and down as if seeing me for the first time. "Oh, Sarah, you were useful when I was broke. A good little cheerleader. But look at me now." He gestured around our small, cluttered apartment, a look of utter contempt on his face. "This life? It's over for me. I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. My heart shattered into a million pieces. But he wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim, glossy brochure, tossing it onto the dining table right next to the shepherd's pie I had so lovingly made. The cover showed a gleaming glass penthouse overlooking the city skyline. "That's my new place," he said, his voice dripping with venomous pride. "The purchase closed this afternoon. And don't bother looking for your name on the deed. It's only in mine." I stood frozen, the glossy image of the penthouse searing itself into my brain. The brochure lay there, an obituary for my marriage, resting beside the dinner I had made with hands that still loved him. The smell of rosemary and baked potatoes filled the air, a cruel, mocking ghost of the life we were supposed to have. My ears were ringing with his words. "I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." It was the kind of line you hear in a bad movie, so cartoonishly villainous that it couldn't possibly be real. But the look in his eyes, that cold, dismissive glare, was terrifyingly real. That was the look of a man I didn't know at all. He didn't wait for my tears. He didn't wait for me to scream or fall apart. He simply turned his back on me and walked into our bedroom, the quiet click of his expensive Italian shoes on the floorboards marking the seconds of my life's implosion. I followed him, my legs moving on their own accord, like a marionette whose strings were about to be cut. He had already pulled a large, empty suitcase from the top of the wardrobe and was methodically taking his new, tailor-made suits off their hangers. The vibrant silks and fine wools were an alien invasion in our humble closet, pushing aside my worn cardigans and sensible teacher blouses. "Mark, please," I whispered, my voice raw. 7 years. Does that mean nothing to you? We built this life together. In this room, on that bed, we promised each other forever. He didn't even look at me. He just continued folding a crisp, white shirt with an unnerving precision. "That was before," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "That was when I was a loser dreaming in a tiny apartment. I've woken up, Sarah. You're still asleep." He finally turned to face me, his expression hardening. "You want to talk about the last 7 years? What did you contribute, really? A teacher's salary that barely covered groceries? You held me back. Your small dreams, your constant need for security. I was aiming for the stars, and you were happy just to see the moon." Every word was a physical blow. He was rewriting our entire history, painting me as an anchor when I had been his sail. I was the one who worked 2 jobs that one summer so he could afford new coding software. I was the one who held him when his first business partner screwed him over. I was the one who believed in him when no one else did, not even himself. The injustice of it all burned hotter than my grief. "I believed in you," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. That meant something. It meant everything. He scoffed and zipped the suitcase shut with a sound of brutal finality. He walked past me, back into the living room, and pulled his wallet from his pocket. He took out a few $100 bills and threw them onto the coffee table, right next to my stack of ungraded student papers. "Here," he said, his tone that of a man tossing a coin to a beggar. "For your trouble. The lease on this place is up at the end of the month. I won't be renewing it. I'd suggest you start looking for a new place. Maybe a roommate." He picked up his coat and the designer shopping bag, not even giving the shepherd's pie a second glance. He walked to the door, opened it, and then paused, his hand on the frame. He looked back at me one last time, a stranger in the doorway of my home. "It's been an education," he said, and the cruel smirk was back. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the deafening silence, surrounded by the ruins of my life and the scent of a dinner for two. For an hour, I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the door, half expecting him to walk back in and say it was all a sick, horrible joke. But the only thing that moved was the clock on the wall, ticking away my old life. The grief came in waves, a suffocating tsunami that left me gasping for air on the lumpy sofa. Sometime after midnight, a switch flipped. The tears stopped, and a cold, hard anger began to crystallize in my chest. He was going to throw me away like an old toy he'd outgrown. He thought he could erase 7 years of my life with a few $100s and an eviction notice. I looked around the apartment, our apartment, filled with things we'd bought together, memories we'd made. My eyes landed on the old wooden desk crammed into the corner, the one he used for his failed startup. It was cluttered with old notebooks, dead hard drives, and binders of paperwork he never threw away. He was meticulous about his business, even in failure. I got up, my movements stiff, and walked over to it. I didn't know what I was looking for. A memory? A reason? My fingers brushed against a dusty, red binder labeled Seed Capital and Agreements. On a whim, I pulled it down. He was so arrogant, so sure of his new power, he hadn't even bothered to clear out his old failures. I blew a layer of dust off the cover and opened it. Inside were contracts, business plans, and loan applications, all for a company that no longer existed. And then I saw it. Tucked into a plastic sleeve was a notarized document from 6 years ago. My hands started to shake as I pulled it out. It was an agreement we had both signed. I remembered the day clearly. I had just received a small inheritance from my grandmother, $5,000. It was everything I had. Mark's startup was on the verge of collapse, and I gave it all to him to keep it afloat. He, in his obsession with making things official, had drafted this contract himself. I read through the dense legal text, my heart pounding in my chest, until my eyes landed on a clause he had written himself, a specific provision he'd insisted on, including to show me how seriously he took my investment. Clause 4B. In the event of company dissolution, the investor's principal shall be repaid from any and all future personal income or capital acquisition of the founder, be it through salary, investment, or unforeseen windfall, including but not limited to lottery winnings or inheritance. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. He might not need me anymore, but according to his own legally binding contract, his inheritance was our inheritance. Holding that piece of paper was like holding a lightning bolt. The air in the room crackled with a new kind of energy. The grief and shock that had paralyzed me just an hour before were burned away by a white-hot flame of pure, unadulterated fury. He called me a cheerleader. He called me an anchor. He threw a few $100s at my feet and told me to get out of his way. But this document, this forgotten relic from his past failures, written in his own arrogant, meticulous hand, was proof. Proof that I wasn't just his wife. I was his first investor. I was a foundational partner in the dream he now claimed was his alone. His unforeseen windfall was legally, contractually, tied to the $5,000 I had bet on him when no one else would. My mind raced. I couldn't just wave this in his face. The man who walked out that door tonight was not the reasonable, albeit struggling, man who signed this. That Mark was gone. This new Mark, the rich Mark, would laugh, tear it up, and sick a team of expensive lawyers on me until I was buried in legal fees I couldn't possibly afford. He would call it a desperate, pathetic attempt by his scorned ex-wife to get a piece of his pie. No, I had to be smarter than him. I had to be colder. I had to use the same calculated precision he used when he folded his new shirts while my world fell apart. I took my phone and snapped a series of crystal-clear pictures of the document, making sure every word, every signature, and the notary's stamp were perfectly legible. I emailed them to my private, password-protected email account, then sent them to my sister for safekeeping, with the subject line emergency, do not delete. I then slipped the original document back into the binder, put the binder back on the dusty shelf, and wiped my fingerprints off the cover. He wouldn't think to look there. In his mind, Everything in this apartment, including me, was worthless garbage from his past, waiting to be disposed of. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I operated on autopilot, moving through a fog of heartbreak and strategic planning. I went to work every day, smiled at my students, and graded their papers, all while a silent war was being mapped out in my head. I found a small, cheap apartment on the other side of town and started packing up my life, box by box. Each photo of us I wrapped in newspaper felt like a tiny betrayal to the woman I used to be, the woman who had loved him unconditionally. Mark never called. He never texted. My half of the rent for the final month appeared in my bank account via a sterile, anonymous transfer. It was a clean cut, a surgical removal from his new, glittering life. The silence from him was more painful than his cruel words. Confirmed that to him I truly was nothing. The day I moved out was gray and drizzling, a perfect pathetic fallacy for my life. As my sister and I carried the last box of my books down the stairs, a gleaming, ridiculously expensive sports car pulled up to the curb. Mark got out. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire moving budget. His hair was perfectly styled, and he was with a woman. She was tall, impossibly glamorous, and clung to his arm like a designer handbag. He saw me, standing on the curb next to a beat-up moving truck, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, guilt, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold, condescending mask. He guided the woman toward the building's entrance, deliberately looking right through me as if I were a ghost. "This is it," he said to her, his voice loud enough for me to hear. "The dump I used to live in. Can you believe it? It's almost nostalgic, like a museum of poverty." The woman giggled, a high-pitched, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. I just stood there, clutching a box of old mugs, and watched them walk inside. He was showing her his past, framing me as part of the squalor he had escaped. That was the moment my resolve hardened from steel into diamond. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about my dignity. It was about the 7 years of my life I had dedicated to him, the sacrifices I had made. It was for the woman who believed in a struggling dreamer in a lumpy old sofa. 2 days later, I walked into the most ruthless-looking law firm I could find in the city center. I sat across from a woman named Eleanor Vance. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes, an even sharper suit, and a reputation for eating men like Mark for breakfast. I told her everything. I showed her the photos of the contract. I didn't cry. I laid out the facts calmly and clearly, just as he had done when he laid out the terms of my dismissal from his life. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and steepled her fingers. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Mr. Stevens made 2 critical errors," she said, her voice like gravel and silk. "The first was underestimating you. The second," she paused, picking up her pen, "was putting his own poison pen to paper. This contract is ironclad. Gloriously, beautifully, ironclad." She explained the plan. We wouldn't just sue him. That would be messy and public, giving him the chance to play the victim. No, we were going to be smarter. She would file an immediate, ex parte injunction to freeze his assets, citing the contract as proof of my stake in his unforeseen windfall. It would happen without warning. 1 minute he'd be a multimillionaire, the next his credit cards would be declined. His accounts would be locked, his penthouse purchase would be halted. Everything would grind to a screeching halt. He wouldn't even know who had done it until he was served the papers. The beauty of it, Eleanor explained, was the timing. The inheritance had only recently been transferred into his personal accounts. He was likely in the middle of moving it around, making big purchases, living large. Freezing it now would cause maximum chaos, maximum humiliation. It was perfect. The next day, I sat in my new, empty apartment, eating takeout from a box on the floor, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Eleanor. "It's done. The accounts are frozen. The dragon's hoard is locked. Let the games begin." A wave of terrified exhilaration washed over me. I had just declared war. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was him, and he wasn't laughing anymore. The voice on the other end was a strangled, panicked roar. "Sarah, what did you do?" But before I could even answer, I heard a second voice in the background, a high-pitched, frantic wail. It was the glamorous woman from the other day. "Mark, what's wrong? My card was just declined at Cartier. They're looking at me like I'm a criminal." I held the phone to my ear, listening to the symphony of his implosion. The panicked roar, the shriek from his new girlfriend about a declined card at Cartier. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I pictured him standing there, the master of the universe, his face turning from smug to crimson as the foundation of his new kingdom crumbled beneath his feet. He had wanted me to feel small, worthless, and discarded. And now, the entire world of a luxury jewelry store was watching him squirm. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cold tea before speaking. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice as calm and placid as a frozen lake. "You must have the wrong number. I don't know a Mark." I hung up. I knew it was petty. I knew it was a childish move in a game that was now deadly serious. But the satisfaction was so profound, so visceral, it felt like I was breathing for the first time in weeks. My phone immediately started ringing again, buzzing angrily on the cardboard box I was using as a table. I ignored it, let him sweat, let him feel that icy terror of having everything and then, in an instant, nothing. Let him wonder, for just a little while, how his perfect world had been so completely and utterly derailed. The official summons was served to him the next morning. Eleanor had arranged for a process server to deliver it to his brand new, not quite his anymore penthouse. I got a full report. He apparently answered the door in a silk robe, looking disheveled and furious, and snatched the papers from the server's hand. The server said he could hear the glamorous girlfriend, whose name I learned was Tiffany, screaming in the background about the humiliation of it all. According to Eleanor, who seemed to derive a predator's joy from these details, the injunction was airtight. It not only froze his main accounts where the inheritance was sitting, but it also put a lien on any major purchases he had already made. The car, the watches, and, most gloriously, the penthouse itself. He was, in effect, a multimillionaire who couldn't afford a cup of coffee. His response came swiftly, in the form of a letter from a law firm with a name so long it took up a quarter of the page. It was full of blustering threats and legal jargon, accusing me of fraud, extortion, and being a vindictive and opportunistic ex-spouse. It called our contract a domestic novelty, a meaningless piece of paper drafted under informal circumstances that had no legal standing. They demanded we drop the frivolous injunction immediately or face a countersuit that would leave me financially and personally ruined. I felt a flicker of fear, but Eleanor just laughed when I read it to her over the phone. "A domestic novelty? Darling, his own signature and a notary's stamp say otherwise. This is just a big dog barking to scare us away. Don't worry, I'm about to show him my teeth." Eleanor's response was a masterclass in legal savagery. She didn't just refute their claims. She ridiculed them. She attached a copy of Mark's own business plan from 6 years ago, the very one I found in the red binder, which explicitly listed my $5,000 investment as critical seed capital. She highlighted the section where he projected a tenfold return for early investors within the first 5 years. While the company unfortunately failed to achieve these lofty projections, she wrote in her letter, "My client's status as an investor and her corresponding contractual rights were clearly established and relied upon by Mr. Stevens himself. To claim now that her investment was a novelty is not only disingenuous but speaks to a pattern of leveraging personal relationships for financial gain and then discarding them when they are no longer convenient." It was a direct shot, wrapping his own failed ambitions around his neck like a noose. The next communication we received was different. It wasn't from his lawyers. It was a text message to my phone. From him. "Sarah, we need to talk. This has all been a huge misunderstanding." I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. "Let's just meet and sort this out, just the two of us." The sudden shift from legal threats to feigned sincerity was nauseating. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to manipulate me. He thought he could turn on the old charm, the whispered promises, and I would melt, just like I used to. He thought I was still the same woman who would have done anything for him. I showed the text to Eleanor. "Don't you dare," she warned. "He's lost control, so now he wants to get you in a room alone where he thinks he can regain it. All communication goes through me. Period." I followed her advice and simply forwarded his text to her. Her reply to his legal team was icy. "Any further attempts by your client to contact Ms. Peters directly will be considered witness intimidation and harassment." A week passed in silence. It was the calm before the storm. I started to settle into my new, smaller life. It was quiet and lonely, but it was mine. I didn't have to walk on eggshells or brace myself for the next condescending remark. I was starting to heal. Then, one evening, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was Mark. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved, and the confident swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. He had found me. He had ignored the legal warnings and come here himself. My first instinct was to call the police. But then I saw the sheer desperation in his eyes. This was the moment of reckoning. I took a deep breath, double-checked that the chain was on the door, and opened it a few inches. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice steady. He flinched at the coldness in my tone. "Sarah, please," he begged, his voice raspy. "Just talk to me." She left. Tiffany. She left this morning. The money, it's all frozen. I can't access anything. They're going to cancel the sale on the penthouse. The dealership took the car back.
I'm ruined.
He looked so pathetic, a king without his kingdom, that I almost felt a pang of pity. Almost. "That sounds like a you problem," I said flatly. His face twisted in anger. The desperation was evaporating, replaced by the familiar, ugly sneer. "This is your fault," he hissed. "You did this. After everything I did for you." "Everything you did for me?" I asked, a dangerous calm settling over me. "What exactly was that?" "I gave you a life," he spat, his voice rising. "I was going to let you live in my world. You could have had anything you wanted." "I didn't want your world, Mark," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I wanted our world, the one you burned to the ground." I started to close the door, but he suddenly slammed his hand against it, trying to force it open. The chain strained. "You're not getting a cent. You hear me?" he roared, his face contorted with rage. "I'll see you in hell before you get any of my money." And then, his voice dropped, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying, malicious light. "You think that little piece of paper is your trump card? You have no idea what else is in those old binders, do you? You should have read the fine print, Sarah. You really should have." He pulled his hand back, a sick, triumphant smile on his face, and walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding. The chain on my door, the only thing holding my world together. What had I missed? What fine print? His words hung in the air long after he was gone, a toxic cloud of doubt and fear. "You have no idea what else is in those old binders. You should have read the fine print." My blood turned to ice. What could I have possibly missed? The contract was so clear, so straightforward. Eleanor had called it ironclad. Was this just another one of his desperate bluffs? A final, pathetic attempt to intimidate me? Or had my own arrogance, my own focus on that single vindicating clause, blinded me to something else? I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely slide the deadbolt into place. I spent the rest of the night in a state of tormented paranoia, my mind racing through every possible legal loophole he could have concocted. The man I knew was meticulous. Had he planted a poison pill in that paperwork 6 years ago? A contractual time bomb set to detonate only if his ship ever truly came in? The next morning, I was at Eleanor's office before it even opened, pacing in the hallway like a caged animal. When she arrived, I practically dragged her inside, recounting Mark's visit and his cryptic warning. She listened intently, her face a stone mask. She didn't dismiss my fears. Instead, she said, "He's scared. and he's lashing out. But that doesn't mean we ignore the threat. We need those binders. All of them. Now. The thought of going back to that apartment, the scene of my life's demolition, made me physically ill. But I had no choice. Eleanor dispatched a paralegal to go with me, and we arranged to meet the building's landlord, who thankfully let us into the unit I had just vacated. The apartment was hollow and empty, echoing with the ghosts of laughter and whispered dreams. It had been stripped of everything that made it a home and now felt like a sterile, beige box. The dusty old desk was still crammed in the corner, a monument to Mark's past ambition. We found the red binder easily enough, but I grabbed every other folder and notebook related to his business ventures. We hauled 4 dusty, forgotten boxes back to Eleanor's office, and for the next 8 hours, we combed through every single piece of paper. We read through old loan applications, vendor agreements, and marketing plans filled with his grandiose, overconfident prose. We found nothing. The contract I had found was the only document that mentioned my investment. There was no fine print, no hidden clause, no escape hatch. By late afternoon, I was starting to believe Mark had just been bluffing, trying to terrorize me. Then the paralegal, a sharp young man named Alex, let out a low whistle. Eleanor? I think you need to see this." He was holding a different binder, one labeled Incorporation and Partnership Docs. Tucked inside was a document I had never seen before. It was a partnership dissolution agreement, signed 2 years after I had given Mark my $5,000. It was between Mark and his first business partner, the one who had supposedly screwed him over and run off with the last of their capital. According to the story Mark had told me, the partner had cleaned out their bank account and vanished. I had spent weeks consoling a heartbroken, betrayed Mark. But this document told a very, very different story. It wasn't a tale of theft. It was a formal buyout. And the buyout amount was exactly $20,000. According to the attached bank statement, that $20,000 had been paid from the company's account, an account that I, his critical seed capital investor, had helped fund. He hadn't been betrayed. He had lied. He had bought his partner out, taken sole control of the worthless company, and played the victim to me. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was the date. The buyout was dated 1 week before. He came to me, crying and broken, saying he needed my $5,000 just to keep the lights on. He already had the money to pay his partner. He took my life savings not because he needed it to survive, but because he wanted it. It was pure, calculated greed. He had seen an opportunity and taken it, playing on my love and my trust to fleece me out of every penny I had. Eleanor read the document, her expression growing colder and harder with every word. She looked up at me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't just a breach of contract anymore," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This is fraud." Mark's threat hadn't been about a hidden clause to protect his inheritance. It was a gamble. He was betting I wouldn't dig deep enough, that I'd be so focused on our contract that I wouldn't look at the rest of his dirty laundry. He was trying to scare me away from the evidence of his original crime. This discovery changed everything. The game was over. We weren't just negotiating a settlement anymore. Eleanor immediately filed a motion to amend our complaint, adding a charge of fraudulent misrepresentation. We didn't just have a contract. We had proof of a premeditated deception that was the very foundation of that contract. His lawyers, who had been so full of bluster, went completely silent. 2 days later, a formal offer of settlement landed on Eleanor's desk. It wasn't a lowball. It was a full, unconditional surrender. He was offering me 50%. 50% of the entire inheritance after taxes. No arguments, no court battle, just a signature. He was terrified. A public fraud case wouldn't just cost him money. It could have criminal implications and would permanently tarnish the new, powerful image he was trying to build. He was a coward, and he was trying to buy my silence. I sat in Eleanor's office, looking at the number on the paper. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was security. It was freedom. It was everything Mark and I had once dreamed of, and now it was mine for the taking. But as I looked at the offer, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. I thought about the man who stood in my doorway, sneering about my fine print. I thought about him crying in my arms 6 years ago. A complete and utter lie. Getting the money was justice, yes, but it wasn't enough. Counteroffer, I said, my voice clear and strong. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I want 70%, I stated. And I want the red binder, the original. And I want him to deliver it to me in person. Eleanor stared at me for a long moment, and then a slow, wolfish grin spread across her face. Now we're talking, she said. His lawyers fought back, calling the demand punitive and unnecessary. But they had no leverage. They knew what we had. They folded in less than an hour. The final meeting took place a week later in Eleanor's conference room. I was there with her. Mark came alone, his lawyer waiting outside. He looked like a ghost. He was pale, thin, and the expensive suit hung off his frame. He didn't look at me. He walked to the table, placed the red binder in front of me, and pushed it across the polished wood. His hand was shaking. I opened it, my fingers tracing the notarized seal on the document that had started it all. Look at me, Mark, I said. He reluctantly lifted his eyes to meet mine. They were hollow, defeated. I want you to know, I said, my voice devoid of any anger, any emotion at all, that I would have stood by you through anything. I believed in the man who signed this. I loved him. The money didn't change you. It just revealed who you were all along. And for that, I can't thank you enough. You set me free. He flinched as if I had struck him. He had nothing to say. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked out of the room, out of the building, and out of my life forever. I never saw him again. I heard through the grapevine that he took what was left of his money and moved to the other side of the country. I used my inheritance to pay off my student loans, buy a small, charming house with a garden, and start a foundation that provides grants to underfunded public schools. The red binder sits on a shelf in my office. It's not a trophy. It's a reminder that sometimes the end of a dream is the beginning of your real life, and that the best investment you can ever make is in yourself.